as you think about your childhood and what you're doing with your daughters, like help us understand how you came to really see the importance of identity.
I think for one, raising daughters and being a mother, the emotional aspect behind our identity is really strong. So what we feel tends to be what we are if we're not grounded in
Mm,
truth and we're not grounded in Christ. And the emotions that we feel towards a circumstance or an experience have a lot of control over who we are. And I experienced that firsthand as a new mom, right?
mm,
Thrown out in the like trenches of newborn life and realizing that, and I think that's probably looking back at it, that is probably why I had this really big reflection of I have no idea who I am because you're feeling all of these emotions, you're experiencing way crazy hormone levels and it's all over the place. And so when my emotions were all over the place, all of a sudden my identity was all over the place.
mm.
And so I
Yeah.
think raising daughters, that's really important. Like, I want them to understand that you're going to feel certain ways in certain circumstances. And while our feelings and emotions are vehicles that can point us towards the truth, they don't dictate the truth and they don't dictate who we are. And so I really wanted to give them this foundation of you can feel this in a moment, but it doesn't mean that's who you are. Like you can feel scared and you can feel broken and you can feel these things, and that's okay, but it does not dictate your identity. Christ does.
Mm. Man, yes, that is so powerful. It seems like the gospel and the culture are going in opposite directions in this area. So,
Yeah.
I think because there's such a lack of identity, people aren't getting their identity from their family. They're not getting their identity, from their gender. They're not getting their identity from their faith. And so they're walking around wondering constantly who they are. But inside of them erupts these incredibly authentic, unbidden reactions emotionally, and they're being told to look inside to find out who you truly are. And what they find are unbidden emotions, unbidden desires. And it becomes virtually impossible for somebody to not identify with those emotions and desires if they're trying to find an authentic grounding for their identity. And they're being told the only way to discover that is within. And so now you've completely trapped a young woman into believing she is her emotions, right? Um, and that reality, I think, then is like a prison. So, because how do you really escape from that? The fact that these emotions are unbidden doesn't necessarily mean that they're a deeper part of your identity, but you do have to then have something somewhere else to find that. Otherwise, I don't know how you avoid this trap. So yeah, I'm curious, yeah, what either of you think about how has this challenge kind of become like more intense for young women today?
I mean, I would say I just keep thinking about my dad because he was very into this. Like when I was a teenager, it felt like kind of a new thing that was coming out that was like, you need to go and you need to find yourself. And he was so like, what? What are they talking about? What do you mean you need to find yourself? I'll tell you who you I can tell you who you are. And so he would take time to really kind of unpack it. And a lot of times it was through stories of our family. Like, this is where you come from. You're like your grandma in this way. I see your grandpa in you when you do this. And so he was able to pass that on from like a familial identity kind of a thing. Um, but I feel like I what women are dealing with this day and age is so the enemy's after us, and so he's trying to attack our identities that are at the core, like our gender, our even just like being a wife and being a mother, those roles are under attack. And to live these things out is to come against like societal norms is it seems like it's becoming. And so we're raising up arrows, warriors. Our children are arrows in the hand of a warrior, whether they're a daughter or a son. And so what does that mean for a daughter? So I think that, identity we're almost afraid to speak our identity, a female, feminine identity over a daughter because of where our society's been taking, the feminist movement has taken us and all of that.
Yeah.
Yeah. I would- go ahead.
Yeah. It's gotten a lot more challenging. Yeah. And Elisa, I'm curious what how you've experienced that or think through that.
Yeah, I would agree, April. And I think too, especially I think hearing the story about your dad, um, the the facade is that we, as in culture, right? Culture doesn't want to be told who we
Mhm.
are. And where Christ says, no, I can tell you who you are. But the reality of that facade is that someone is telling our kids who they are, whether it's culture or friends or their sports teams or the government, and all of these entities are speaking identity over all the children all the time, right? Whatever they're exposed to. And so I think that's kind of to really kind of hit that baseline, like, hey, we have to agree that there is identity being spoken over our kids, over us as mothers, over fathers from lots of different places. So
Mhm.
it's really, as a mother, I want to speak identity over my
Yeah.
children, over my daughters. I want my husband to speak identity over his daughters. And so I think that that kind of gets a lot of pushback, like, oh, you have, like you said, you have to let them figure it out. But they're really not figuring it out. They're hearing lots of other voices, and then they're piecing these different voices together. And all of a sudden, that becomes their identity and that shaking ground. And I think the change in that is your reactions and your how you emotionally respond to things. So if you have this identity that is based in culture or society, you become your reactions or your responses, right? So now I am responding to a circumstance and that is now my identity, right? I am scared of X, Y, and Z.
Mhm.
This puts me in a place of fear, so that is who I am. Whereas Christian identity and Jesus says the opposite. My reactions are controlled by my identity. Like, this is my cornerstone. And so now I can respond and react accordingly to these circumstances that are put around me. And I think
Yeah.
it's a shift that should be happening.
Yes.
Mhm.
Man, that's really powerful. Yeah. I think that's so good to call out that the very people who are saying, figure this out on your own, look inside, are filling their minds and hearts with movies, stories, music lyrics, marketing campaigns, advertisements, all kinds of messages to try to tell them who they are. And then when they find that these emotions are being conditioned by a lot of the things maybe they're seeing on social media or in these videos, or then it's seen as authentic. It's like not exactly authentic. It's been deeply, like, ground into you. And
Yeah.
I think one of the, one of the things I think, especially as you're describing, Annalisa, like, okay, I'm having this fear come up inside of me. Is that who I am? Part of what I think you are given in the gospel and in the scriptures is, like, in Greek, they call it a telos, which is sort of like a purpose. Like, you see what you're aiming for, what this is for. And so you think about like an infant, they're terrified of everything, right? Is that who they are? No, because you can see inside that infant, like, we know who they are born to be. They're born to become,
Mhm.
a woman, a mother, and where they're going to be in maturity. And so if they identify with something, a fear that they have when they're 2, that then they have when they're 30, that's not necessarily a good thing. But how would you know if you didn't think about what they were designed to become, who they were designed to become? Like, what does that identity look like? What does it look like for them in their in who God originally has created them to be? And so, if you don't have divine revelation telling you what your telos is, what you're aiming at, what you're really becoming, then it does become impossible to know which of these emotions to identify with. Is this a childhood emotion? One of the things that Paul says, is that when I was a child, I thought like a child. I lived like a child. I felt like a child. But when I became a man, I put aside childish things. Like, he saw this clear distinction between what it was like to be a boy and a man, and it was critical to know the difference so that he could know what to throw off. But if you're never told what you are to be, what does it mean to be a godly woman or a godly mother, then you don't know what is childish and what is a part of that ultimate identity that God is designing and is helping you become. And so it's not surprising with this kind of philosophy of life that people are kind of stuck in the past or stuck in a kind of a very immature young version of themselves, because they don't know how to mature out of that. And so what we need is like some direction, blessing, clear identity markers for this.